the truth awaits in the dark. True story.
The heavy dead silence of solid rock pressing against your chest. The air is thick, stale, and tastes like ancient dust. You try to take a deep breath, but you can't. The stone walls around you are too tight. They are squeezing your ribs, pushing the oxygen out of your lungs. And you are 100 feet below the surface of the earth. Welcome to the Verdict Files. We have explored the crushing depths of the ocean and the freezing isolation of the deep woods. But today, we are descending into a different kind of nightmare. A nightmare built on pure, unadulterated claustrophobia. We are opening the vault on a case where the enemy wasn't a predator or a machine. The enemy was the planet itself. Before we crawl into the darkness, please take a deep breath. Guide the like button into the narrowest, darkest crevice you can find, and hit subscribe if you have the psychological endurance to survive this investigation. Now, turn on your headlamp. Let's go underground. The date was November 24th, 2009. John Edward Jones, a 26-year-old medical student, husband, and soon-to-be father of two, was visiting his family in Utah for the Thanksgiving holiday. John was an adventurous man. As a child, he and his brother Josh spent hours exploring underground cave systems. But it had been years since John last navigated the suffocatingly tight spaces of a deep cave. His body had grown. He was 6 feet tall and weighed around 200 pounds. He was no longer the agile teenager who could slip through the earth's cracks. That evening, John, his brother, and a group of friends decided to explore the Nutty Putty Cave. Located in the Utah desert, Nutty Putty was famous among local spelunkers. It was a hydrothermal cave, meaning the walls were formed by superheated water, creating a maze of smooth, slippery, and incredibly tight tunnels. It was a popular spot, but it demanded respect. Around 8 p.m., the group descended into the dark, narrow mouth of the cave. For the first hour, everything was normal. They navigated the mapped sections, crawling on their bellies through the tight, dusty corridors. But John wanted to push further. He wanted to find a notorious section of the cave known as the Birth Canal, a terrifyingly narrow passage that explorers had to carefully squeeze through. John split from the main group and began to crawl alone into an unmapped, unexplored section of the cave. This was his first fatal mistake. In the pitch-black darkness, illuminated only by the narrow beam of his headlamp, everything looked the same. John found what he thought was the entrance to the birth canal. He entered headfirst. The tunnel immediately sloped sharply downward. It was incredibly tight, but he pushed forward, assuming it would eventually open up into a larger room. It didn't. John had not entered the birth canal. he had crawled into an uncharted, dead-end crevice that rescuers would later call Ed's Bush. The passage was a vertical, twisting fissure in the solid rock. It was only 18 inches wide and 10 inches high. To put that into perspective, it was roughly the size of a standard microwave oven. As John pushed himself further down the 70-degree decline, the rock walls closed in on him. He couldn't turn around. There was absolutely no room to bend his knees or move his arms. His only option, he thought, was to keep pushing forward, hoping the passage would widen. He reached a section where the tunnel took a sharp, unnatural bend. To get past it, John had to exhale completely, emptying his lungs of all air to make his chest cavity as small as physically possible. He pushed his body forward into the tiny gap, but when he tried to inhale again, his chest expanded against the solid rock. He was stuck, completely, hopelessly wedged in the stone, and worse, he was trapped upside down. The physical and psychological horror of this exact moment is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine being wrapped tightly in a heavy lead blanket, unable to move your arms or legs, while hanging upside down in total darkness, hundreds of feet underground. When you are suspended upside down, the human body begins to fail. Gravity forces blood to pool in your brain and your lungs. Your heart has to work twice as hard to pump blood against gravity back down to your legs. The pressure inside your skull builds to agonizing levels. Breathing becomes incredibly difficult, especially when thousands of pounds of solid rock are compressing your rib cage. John's brother, Josh, was the first to find him. He heard John's muffled cries echoing through the dark rock. Josh crawled down the narrow shaft and saw John's calves and feet sticking out of the tiny hole. He grabbed his brother by the ankles and pulled with all his strength. For a second, John slid upward, but the moment Josh lost his grip, John slid back down, slipping even deeper into the wedge. His arms were now pinned beneath his chest. He couldn't move a single muscle. Josh realized he couldn't do this alone. He crawled back to the surface to call for help. What followed was one of the most agonizing, complex, and heartbreaking rescue operations in history. Over 137 trained rescuers, paramedics, and cave experts rushed to the Utah desert. But their expertise was practically useless against the geometry of the cave. The tunnel leading to John was so incredibly tight that only one rescuer could reach him at a time. They couldn't use heavy machinery. They couldn't use explosives to break the rock because the shock waves would instantly crush John. They had to work with hand tools, ropes, and sheer human endurance in a space so claustrophobic that the rescuers themselves were having panic attacks. For over 20 hours, John remained trapped upside down in the dark. The rescuers spoke to him, gave him water through a tube, and tried to keep him awake. They set up a complex system of climbing pulleys, anchoring ropes into the cave walls, looping them around John's legs. Finally, they began to pull. The system worked. Slowly, agonizingly, they managed to lift John out of the tightest part of the wedge. After 24 hours of pure hell, John was high enough to make eye contact with one of his rescuers. He was exhausted, in immense pain, but he was alive. They just needed to lift him a few more feet to clear the terrible bend in the rock. And then tragedy struck. A loud, violent crack echoed through the cave. One of the natural stone arches holding the crucial pulley system completely shattered under the immense pressure. The carabiner snapped off the rock, striking a rescuer in the face. Without the tension of the ropes, John immediately fell backward. He slid violently down the narrow 70-degree shaft, wedging himself even deeper into the crevice than he was before. The dust settled in the pitch-black tunnel. The rescue system was entirely destroyed. The psychological devastation of that moment broke everyone involved. John had tasted freedom, only to be swallowed by the earth once again. The rescuers desperately tried to rebuild the pulley system, but it was too late. The human body can only survive upside down for a limited amount of time. The immense pressure on John's heart and lungs finally became too much. The stress, the exhaustion, and the suffocating environment caused his body to shut down. On the night of November 25th, exactly 27 hours after he first entered the crevice, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead. The rescue mission had failed, but the nightmare wasn't entirely over. The authorities now had a gruesome problem. They needed to retrieve John's body. However, after carefully assessing the structural integrity of the cave, they realized that trying to extract him would put the lives of the recovery team at extreme risk. The passage was simply too dangerous. The family made a heartbreaking decision. They agreed to leave John where he was. The Nutty Putty Cave was permanently closed. The entrance was sealed shut with poured concrete, turning the entire underground labyrinth into a permanent, undisturbed tomb for John Edward Jones. This case is a chilling reminder of our vulnerability. We conquer mountains, we dive to the bottom of the sea, and we fly into space. But there are still places on this earth where human engineering, willpower, and hope are absolutely meaningless. Places where the earth will simply close its jaws around you and never let go. Thank you for joining me on this investigation. If you survived this claustrophobic descent, make sure you hit the subscribe button to join us for our next classified case. And tell me in the comments below, what terrifies you more? The open, deep ocean or the crushing weight of a tight underground cave? This has been the Verdict Files. Stay safe and never explore the dark alone.
The truth awaits in the dark.